She didn't walk in expecting kindness. She walked in expecting professionalism. What she met instead was something colder, something deliberate, the kind of dismissal that doesn't shout, doesn't curse, doesn't need to explain itself because it assumes agreement from everyone in the room. The doors closed behind her with a soft mechanical click, and in that moment, the space decided she didn't belong. Not because she said the wrong thing, not because she broke a rule, but because she was quietly judged before she was ever addressed. The showroom was built to impress, glass everywhere, light bouncing off polished metal, voices layered with money and certainty, people who knew exactly what they were allowed to want. When she stepped forward, conversations didn't stop. They curved around her like water avoiding a stone. Salespeople glanced once, then looked through her, past her, already done. She stood there without moving, hands relaxed, posture straight, waiting for someone to acknowledge the obvious fact that a human being had entered the room. No one did. Time stretched in small humiliations. A couple brushed past her, laughing. A salesman walked directly around her without apology. She felt herself becoming invisible by consensus. At the reception desk, a woman finally looked up, eyes sharp with assessment. She didn't ask how she could help. She didn't smile. She tilted her head slightly and said, loud enough for others to hear, that if she was lost, service entrances were around the back. The words were chosen carefully. Not an insult. A suggestion wrapped in judgment. She said she was there to look at a vehicle. Her voice was calm, measured, controlled. The receptionist laughed, not loudly, just enough to invite others to join if they wanted. She said this wasn't a place for browsing and suggested somewhere more realistic. Several people heard it. No one corrected it. No one intervened. Silence filled the gaps where decency should have lived. She stepped aside without protest. That decision seemed to irritate them more than anger would have. A man noticed. He had been watching from a distance, already convinced this moment belonged to him. He approached slowly, hands behind his back, the posture of someone performing authority for an audience. He asked if there was a problem, but his eyes never left her. The receptionist answered for him, smiling now, enjoying the attention. The man nodded as if a conclusion had already been reached. He told her this dealership served serious buyers, people who understood where they were. He spoke slowly, carefully, making sure the room heard him. She replied that she knew exactly where she was. A few heads turned. That was new. The man chuckled, then said these vehicles weren't for everyone, that they didn't waste time on fantasies. The word lingered longer than necessary, like a verdict. She held his gaze and said nothing. The silence unsettled him. He asked for proof that she belonged. He said the word louder the second time, belonged, as if the room were a private club and he had been elected gatekeeper. People gathered closer now, not to help, to watch. Phones stayed in pockets. No one wanted to be involved. The man enjoyed the attention. He told her to leave before things became embarrassing. She didn't move. His smile tightened. He called for security. The guard arrived quickly. He didn't ask questions. He didn't look at her face. He took her arm like she was already a problem that needed removing. She told him she would walk. He tightened his grip. The contact was brief but final. The room watched as she was escorted across the floor, her shoes echoing in a space designed to sell confidence. The manager followed behind, explaining loudly that they protected their environment and that this was what happened when people didn't know their place. At the doors, she stopped. She turned once and looked at him. Her face showed nothing. She told him he was making a decision he wouldn't be able to undo. He laughed and said decisions were his job. She stepped outside. The doors closed behind her. Inside, he straightened his jacket and apologized for the interruption. The room exhaled and went back to business as if nothing had happened. She stood outside without pacing, without calling anyone immediately. She watched reflections move behind the glass. She waited. 30 minutes later, the doors opened again. This time, the shift was immediate. Conversations faltered. Movement slowed. A man entered with purpose, his presence changing the temperature of the room. The manager turned, already preparing his smile, then froze. Color drained from his face. The man stopped just short of her and lowered his head slightly as he spoke her name. The room snapped to attention. She said calmly that she had been there earlier. The manager laughed nervously and tried to explain. She turned to him fully for the first time. Her voice didn't rise. She listed what he had done. Denied service. Ordered her removed. Did it publicly, confidently. The silence returned. Heavier now, pressing down on everyone who had watched and said nothing. She reached into her bag and placed a card on the nearest desk. The sound was soft. The effect was not. She spoke her name, and the room realized it had made a very expensive mistake. She looked at the man beside her and asked how long this had been happening. He answered without hesitation. Too long. She faced the room. Every humiliation, she said, had been witnessed, ignored aloud. She turned back to the manager and told him his employment ended immediately. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue. She simply took back what had always been hers. Then she turned to leave, and the consequences followed behind her like a shadow. She didn't wait to hear excuses. She didn't wait for apologies to form. She walked toward the exit at the same measured pace she had kept all afternoon, as if nothing had disrupted her day except a necessary correction. Behind her, the room remained frozen, people unsure whether to speak, to move, or to pretend they had always known who she was. Authority had changed hands without a raised voice, and that unsettled them more than anger ever could. Outside, the light felt different, cleaner. She paused near the curb, not to collect herself, but to allow the moment to finish unfolding the way it needed to. Through the glass, movement resumed in fragments. A manager whispered urgently into a phone. A receptionist avoided eye contact with everyone. The guard stood stiffly, hands clasped, suddenly aware of how quickly power could reverse direction. Consequences were moving now, quietly, efficiently, without drama. Inside, the man who had ordered her out stood where confidence used to be. He tried to speak to the regional director, but the director didn't look at him. He was already issuing instructions, already documenting, already treating the situation like what it was, a failure of leadership, not a misunderstanding. The manager's voice cracked as he tried to explain intent, context, pressure. None of it landed. Intent doesn't matter when harm is public. Context doesn't erase conduct. Pressure doesn't excuse cruelty. Employees who had watched in silence earlier now felt the weight of their quiet. Some looked ashamed, others defensive. A few simply looked afraid. The room understood something important all at once. This wasn't about a car sale. It was about who gets to decide who belongs. And that decision had just been taken out of their hands. The regional director addressed the staff without theatrics. He stated facts, policies, immediate changes, investigations, training, accountability. He didn't need to raise his voice. Everyone was listening now. The receptionist who had laughed was escorted away, stunned, her earlier confidence gone. The guard was dismissed on the spot, his badge collected without ceremony. Each step felt final. No one clapped. No one argued. This was not entertainment. This was correction. Outside, she checked her phone for the first time. Messages had piled up, most of them unnecessary. She responded to none. Control, once reclaimed, doesn't rush to explain itself. She slid the phone back into her bag and looked down the street, already thinking past the moment. Power isn't proven by how long you stay in a room. It's proven by how easily you can leave it changed. Inside, the manager finally realized no one was coming to rescue him. He stood alone near the desk where her card still rested, untouched, as if afraid it might confirm the reality he was trying to deny. He had believed authority was something you performed loudly enough for others to accept. He had believed silence meant permission. He had been wrong on both counts. The regional director approached him once, quietly, and told him to gather his things. There would be no reference, no transfer, no appeal. The words were simple, the outcome permanent. The manager nodded, eyes down, and walked away through the same doors he had once guarded so proudly. No one followed him. No one said goodbye. The showroom never fully recovered its earlier noise. Conversations stayed lower. Laughter didn't return. People moved with caution now, aware that assumptions carry risk. Customers sensed the shift without understanding it. Something had recalibrated, something important. She drove away without looking back. Later that evening, reports were filed. Policies were rewritten. Names were removed from systems. Training schedules were updated. None of it made headlines. None of it needed to. Real accountability rarely announces itself. It simply changes outcomes. By morning, the dealership would open again, cleaner in ways that couldn't be polished. Employees would greet customers differently. Managers would think twice before speaking once. Silence would no longer feel safe to hide behind. That was the real consequence. Not firings, not embarrassment. Awareness. She didn't issue a statement. She didn't post online. She didn't need applause. The correction had already been delivered where it mattered most. People who witnessed it would remember. People who heard about it would adjust. That was enough. Power doesn't always enter loudly. Sometimes it waits. Sometimes it watches. Sometimes it allows arrogance to fully reveal itself before stepping forward. And when it does, it doesn't argue. It enforces. If that ending stayed with you, don't scroll past it. Share it with someone who thinks silence is weakness. Comment the moment you felt the shift. Tell us where you're watching from and what word describes her restraint. Subscribe for more stories where dignity holds the line, arrogance collapses quietly, and power returns to the hands that built it.